They ferried me out in a white-painted tender that looked like it had been salvaged from 3 other boats. The cabin smelled like diesel and old lunch meat. We pushed off from the harbor at Scani just after a squall line clawed east along the empty mouth of Lake Superior, and for 2.5 hours we rode the slow pounding slope toward a black pin on the horizon that refused to get bigger until all at once it was a tower. The tower was Stannard rock, a granite cylinder that rose out of a shoal the size of a football field and took the weather like a boxer. They call it the loneliest place in the world. The last 3 keepers had called it something else, but nobody wrote those names down. The tender bumped steel to steel against the landing stage. A crewman with a beard so straight it looked ironed handed me a heaving line and said, "Make it good, rookie." I made it good. My duffel hit the deck with a sound like a wet heart. I have a facility with forms and instructions, and I spent 6 months ticking boxes to get here. A seasonal contract through a non-profit that partners with the Coast Guard. Stannard was technically automated now, but they wanted a person on station during the fall shipping crush to deter vandals and provide weather logs, general upkeep, and a smiling story for donors come spring. You sign to clean brass, mop stairs, paint everything designated federal gray, and enter wind, visibility, and pressure at 1-hour intervals. If something burns, you kill power and call it in. If something breaks, you tag it out and call it in. The brochures did not mention what the station commander said when he shook my hand on the dock in Marquette. Stannard has local orders. Follow them. Don't improvise. They offloaded a crate of dry goods and a drum of diesel for the generator. The engineer, a woman with Popeye forearms named Redding, took me up the ladder into the watchroom and then up the spiral iron to the lantern. The air changed there. It was colder, as if the glass cage at the top refused the heat from the levels below. The Lenzen old second order, Frunel wreathed in a new motor assembly, was cleaner than my apartment's windows had ever been. On the catwalk we leaned out into the wind, and I saw the lake for what it was, not a thing with an opposite shore, but a field that kept going. The shoal bled green and pale over the shelves. The deep beyond was indigo. I felt the pressure of it on my teeth. "You log everything," Redding said. "Everything. Keep the tender schedule on the chart table, and don't put your fingers on the lens. Don't let tourists on the island, not that you'll get any this time of year. Radio discipline, channel 16 only for hailing and emergency. If you hear chatter that doesn't belong, don't talk back. That's the Coast Guard rule. You'll hear this and that. The local rule is the same. Don't talk back. That and what?" I said. She gave me a look like a thing moving behind a wave. "After equinox, the lake makes noise, wind noise, water noise. You'll think you hear voices. It's just mechanics. Your job is to not make it worse." We went down to the watchroom. She showed me the breaker panels, the old Loran cabinet that someone had turned into a broom closet, the barometer, the anemometer repeater, the fog signal control, no longer a diaphone or a bell, but an electric horn that you only set to continuous if visibility dropped below half a mile. There was a book on the shelf in a green binder, one of those 3-inch monsters with thumb tabs. "Local orders," Reading said, tapping it. "You sign for it, and you do what it says. Don't add pages. Don't take pages. Don't copy pages. If you don't like what it says, talk to it when the wind is out of the west. It'll be kinder then." That last part I took for her sense of humor. We did a last walk through sleeping lockers, with box mattresses and wool blankets, that still had names stitched into the corners from the 1950 South. Galley with a propane stove generator room with a clattering two-cylinder that shook the world through the soles of your feet. Back on the landing, the engineer cupped her hands around her mouth and shouted something I didn't hear over the chop. Then the tender pushed off. They dwindled. The lake filled in the space where people had been. I signed for the keys and the binder. I signed under a paragraph that said something about assumption of risk. I signed the watch log at 1400 with wind WNW 12 knots, visibility 8 miles, barometer 29.96 and falling. I made a pot of coffee I didn't want and carried it up to the lantern because the air was better there and the horizon made sense. At 1600 I read the binder. Local orders for station Stannard Rock, LT 4711, 6 and 8713.2, revised 1978, amend 1992, 2005. Typed on onion skin paper, pages creased and thin as a pressed moth, tabs with headers that read duty, water, noise, light, visits, storm, inventory, emergency. My own handwriting is blocky and ugly. Whoever wrote these had a careful teacher, each letter complete, the whole page a calm field. Under duty, it said, log hourly wind, viz, and pressure. If the needle drops below 29.50 rapidly, go to storm. Do not log gusts above 60 knots. Do not count waves. On nights of odd calendar date after 2300, do not answer channel 16. On even nights after 2300, answer only to call sign K4972. If hailed by given name, do not answer. If hailed by surname, answer, but ask for the word spruce before you give your own. If the other party fails to say spruce, kill power to the radio for 1 hour. Write maintenance in the log. The radio will come back with noise. Let it underwater, it said. Fresh water is in the cistern. You may hear it moving at night. Do not fix leaks after midnight. Do not mop steps in the dark. If you smell lilac in the watchroom or the workroom, salt the steps lightly from the can under the sink and wait. Do not descend further until the smell is gone. Do not pour salt over the landing ladder. If salt gets on the ladder, wash it off at dawn only. Under noise, if you hear a bell, it is not ours. It belongs to downbounders who are not on the lists. Do not answer bells. Do not go to the catwalk for bells. If you hear a whistle, 3 longs, that is the ore carrier making the point for the Sioux, you may answer that once per watch with the horn, if visibility is actually poor. If you hear your father's voice, do not answer. If you hear your own voice, go to storm. If you hear a second set of steps behind you, go to light. Under light, keep the light at its characteristic. FLW10s. Do not alter the characteristic. Do not let the lantern be dark in the period between local sunset and 0007. If the light is dark, then they will come to the iron and climb. If an object appears on the catwalk and asks admission, check the clock and the date and the knock. If the knock is 232, do not open. If the knock is 3 even, you may open if you are expecting relief. If you are not expecting relief, do not open. If the light shows a color other than white, go to emergency. Do not look into the lens while the motor is running. Do not look into the lens when the motor is off. If you forget and look into the lens, go slowly down the stairs backwards and count 120. If you cannot count, hold the rail and wait to feel the pull on your sleeve. You will feel it only once. Do not turn. Under visits. Relief scheduled Wednesdays. weather permitting. If the tender comes on a Monday, do not lower the ladder. If the tender comes with a name you recognize that is not in the schedule, do not lower the ladder. If the tender comes in a sea state greater than 3, do not lower the ladder. If the tender comes after equinox with flags you don't recognize, call it in and go to inventory. If someone in uniform knocks after midnight, do not open. There are inspectors who do not wear the right face. Under storm, if the barometer drops quickly, set storm, shut and dog all doors. Toggle fog signal to manual if visibility drops. Do not set continuous unless you cannot see the catwalk railing. Do not exit to light deck during lightning. Do not log pressure below 29.10. If the radio hails you in your own voice, pull power to the radio and log maintenance. Do not read aloud while the horn is on. Do not sleep in the lantern. Wear your jacket even inside, it will be needed. When thunder is a continuous tone, breathe shallow. If you see shapes in the spray, do not mark them on the chart. Under inventory, do not count. Do not count cans or light bulbs or rags. Do not count steps in the stair. Do not mark tally on the steel. If you count, the lake will count you. The lake is better at counting. If you must count, count backward from 100 and stop at 0. If you keep going past 0, go to light and do not open the door. Under emergency, if you must harm yourself to avoid opening the door, do small harm first. If you must harm the station to avoid opening the door, do small harm first. There are larger harms. It is better to be fined than eaten. The previous keeper wrote, if you hear the whisper, you can give it the spoon. It will not know what to do with a spoon. This is a joke. Do not feed the whisper. Do not feed it anything you would want back. If you break a rule, there is a way to unbreak it. Ask the rule for the opposite. Do not ask for the opposite of light. I read it all again because I was annoyed. I like rules. I like rules because they make systems manageable, and my life, to that point, had been an inventory of systems. But these rules were a different style. Some bureaucrat's order sheet married to something else, a voice with dirt under its nails. I had the sense of walking into a room where people had been arguing in low voices and stopped when the door opened. I wanted to edit it for clarity. I wanted to underline the parts I thought were ridiculous and show reading later and have a laugh. I underlined nothing. At 1700 I wrote wind W 10 to 15, V7, barometer 29.90 and falling slowly. At 1800 I logged sunset, light on. At 1810 I jarred the coffee again and thought about lilac. My father was a maintenance mechanic at a paper mill in Ontonagon. He used to say of the lake, it doesn't want you, it doesn't not want you. You aren't in the category of things it can want. When he died, we put his ashes where the river meets Superior, and the water turned the Bag S marveling into a single color. I did not plan to hear his voice. At 20:45, there was a bell. It was not a bell that lived in the watchroom of my mind. It was not a bell from a church or a dinner table. It came from below the range of the horn steel on steel in a way that carried like cold. Long, short, short, long. I went to the catwalk in spite of myself because habit defeats instruction 100 different ways. The world outside was a bowl of ink. The light kept its characteristic 10 seconds between swings of brightness, the motor ticking like an old clock hand in those spaces. Nothing. I gripped the rail. I told myself I would log it as unknown sound. Duration 5 minutes. I pictured which line of the binder the bell belonged to, and I said out loud, "Not ours, not ours." And the wind took the words and made them leave the catwalk. The bell stopped. Close to the lantern glass, something showed teeth. I jerked away like a kid from a stovetop. It was nothing and a reflection at once. My face in the curve of glass, the black of the lake making it a mirror, and then in the corner a flash that was not white. My hand was on the knob before I had thought the thought. Light if the light shows a color other than white. Go to emergency, and in the argument with my own reflex, the flash came again, green. And I realized it was a navigation light on something running without range lights, passing fast off the south shelf. Freeboard, low, long, black. It was an ore boat. It was far too close for comfort, maybe a mile off our shoal, a place no ore boat had any business skating. The radio hissed into life. Channel 16, the open bucket. Someone keying with a foot on the mic. Stannard Rock, Stannard Rock. This is the downbound Cassandra, making for the Sioux. Do you read? I reached for the mic. I had read the binder. It was an even night, the 30th, and the rules said on even nights answer only 2K4972. Cassandra, this is K4972. Go ahead. Wind on your roof, Stannard. Say again, Cassandra. Wind on your roof. Says it's your father's. Says he wants you to look up and count the bolts. My hand felt very far away from my arm. The mic switch was under my thumb. My father's voice was nothing like that. The voice on the channel was a man who had eaten too much salt and sounded amused. I put the mic down and pulled power to the radio with a flip of the breaker. The watchdog circuit tripped and the speaker went dead. I wrote maintenance in the log in a neat hand, and my hand looked like I had asked it to perform someone else's signature. The ore boat kept on in the dark, its green wink swallowed by spray. The light kept turning. I drank my bad coffee in the watchroom and did not go to the rail again until 2300, when I had to log. The world was the same, and I was not. The first night alone in the tower, I slept in the locker with my jacket on because the binder had told me to. I laughed at myself alone and then slept like a man under an engine. The dreams were winter dreams. Snow that had edges like reefs and slow sound. A knock woke me. 3 knocks, even spaced, the kind of force a gloved hand can manage when it is cold but not desperate. I came awake with a hiccup in my chest. The clock on the watchroom wall said 00 for 2. I held my breath and waited for the knock pattern. 232. It did not come. The knocks were 3 even again. I was not expecting relief. I was expecting nothing. The local orders told me what to do. I sat on my hands. The idea, when it occurred, felt like the lake giving me a bone. If I could see the landing ladder in the moonlight or the handrails, I could take heart from geometry. I went to the catwalk with the lantern door shut and clicked my headlamp once against the interior frame so that it would glow blue for just long enough to see my own shoe. I did not put the light to the glass. The waves were down now, or I had grown used to their rhythm. The ladder hung like a spine. There was nothing on it. The knocks came again. They came from the interior door, the steel door, with a peephole that led to the workroom, which was absurd because I had dogged it closed and I was on the other side of it. 3 even again, not an ounce of desperation. Go away, I said before I could stop myself. The wind carried my own voice back to me through the leaking seals. The watchroom grew very quiet. I became aware of the faint smell I had taken for old wood. the kind of sweet you get off a pallet, a ghost of lilac. The can of salt was under the sink where the binder said, "I salted the upper steps exactly 3 and no more," all the while undercut by the thought that I was following a joke at my expense, that Redding had simply salted me for the fall and I was feeding superstition with table salt. The smell lifted. The pancakes of fog I had not seen pressed against the glass. At 00:55 the knock came again and I said, like a muscle flex I hadn't ordered, "I am not expecting relief." The rest of the night was clean. The barometer slid down another tick. The watchroom light hummed. When the lens swung past, the face of the lake was seen, unseen, seen. The binder had done its job, or I had done mine. I found a deck of cards in the drawer and played 13 hands of solitaire until I held my hands up and wondered whether cards counted as counting. I swept the watchroom and put the dust in a jar I labeled "dust" outside with a piece of tape. I nearly wrote one on the label and then pictured the inventory tab in the binder. The angry little imperative, "Do not count tonight." I peeled the tape off and threw it away. The second day was a daytime day until it wasn't. Wind, southwest, rising. The sky did its flat iron trick and smoothed itself into old metal. I cleaned brass for the pleasure of it. At 1400 I went down into the engine room to check the generator and top the tank. Diesel smell, a kind of permanent warmth. I checked the belts and the oil and wiped a drip off the floor that looked new, made a note to keep an eye on it. There was a chalk mark on the bulkhead behind the drum of detergent, a vertical tally of little scratches that stopped at 38. I put my hand on the wall, and it felt like putting your hand on the outside of a sleeping animal. Inventory. The binder had said, "Do not mark tally on the steel." I found the little steel brush you used to descale rust and very carefully erased those 38 marks. At 1710, the radio woke up without the breaker. White noise rose out of it on its own, and all the little red LEDs along the rack of gear breathed once and steadied. I poured my coffee away in the sink and put the cup down where I could justify it later, and went to the radio like a man approaching a stray dog with a piece of meat between his teeth. The speaker didn't speak, but the hiss had gained direction. The way a storm in another room tells when you turn toward the door. The barometer had dropped to 29.62 in an hour. "Stannard," the hiss said, with my father's voice around it, and then not my father at all, then my own. "Stannard, this is K4972 maintenance. K4972 maintenance. If you can copy, say the word spruce." The binder told me what to do when the radio thinks it is me. I pulled the plug on the power strip, feeding the set, and the hiss cut in half, then crawled along the floor like a fog. The horn needed to be on. I traced the wire with my eyes from the fog signal control to the horn amp and left that live. The wind leaned into the tower. Far east, a line of black on black. I pushed the green binder closed with 2 fingers, like I was putting a lid on a breathing thing, and wrote, with feeling, "maintenance," in the log. When it's rough on the shoal, the lake doesn't circle. It comes in straight. At 2140, the fog wrapped the lantern, and the horn took away words, and beyond the glass there were shapes, and every time the lens came around and cut the world cleanly. It showed me something on the catwalk that wasn't there for continuous time. A rope draped over the lower rung, a slicker folded neatly a hand. The noise under the horn was something like a crowd trying to whisper. Redding's voice in my head, weary as an oar. "Don't make it worse." I did not make it worse. At 2216, the diesel hiccuped. The pitch came down and came back, and the horn put a little cough into its own voice. And I was on the stair with the tool roll and a flashlight, without making the decision to go there. The binder said not to go outside during lightning. It did not prohibit the generator room, but every second under the lantern I thought about leaving it empty. The smell downstairs was not lilac. It was hot oil and hot metal and a sweetness I associated with antifreeze. The regulator panel's ammeter was jumping, and the engine had a new rhythm. The fuel line between day tank and injectors oozed a line of diesel that glittered like fish on a dock. I tightened the collar with hands that felt like gloves on other hands. The pitch came back up. I wiped the drip. I stood there with my flashlight off and listened to the engine and the little pop-rent sounds. Water made under the floor when the lake lifted and set the station. Behind me, a set of steps came down the stair and stopped at the landing level with my ear. I turned with the tool in my fist. The beam of my light caught nothing but iron and rivets and a sign that said no oxygen monoxide in the 60s way. But the event did not end. The part of my body that remembers snakes and the part that understands bureaucracy wrestled like dogs. And the larger dog won the binder, the line under noise. If you hear a second set of steps behind you, go to light. I left the tool in my back pocket. I closed the door to the engine room and latched it. I went up the stairs. It was like running in a dream, where the staircase kept repeating itself. Same bolt heads, same spray of old paint on the inner wall, same dent from a dropped bucket. And then the watchroom was there, and the lantern beyond, and the smell of water inside the glass. The light was doing its job. It threw on 10 seconds and off 10 seconds, and the motor kept that vigil rhythm, and my own breath went to it and came back. In one of the off periods, a shape was on the outer catwalk. I saw it in silhouette against the phosphor of the waves breaking. It was a person-shaped space in rain gear and boots, with water streaming off like skin, and I knew a detail that my mind tried to put behind my back. It was facing the wrong way. It was standing with its back to the lake and its face to the glass, but the posture of it read like someone looking down into the water with love. I do well with rules. The rules said, do not open. The shape knocked. 3 even. Only softer than the steel wanted to give back. Then, after a pause, 232. The binder had been specific on that pattern. My hands fisted. It did not knock after that. It put its wet faceive. There was a face against the glass and rested like that. The smell of lilac returned, as if the catwalk had become a hallway to a dead woman's perfume. The shape lifted the rain jacket and laid it on the lower rung as carefully as if it were folding a flag. My father died at the plant on a midday in November. He died of a weak place in a vessel in his stomach, and he went down on one knee in a room that had signs that said lockout, tag out in 3 colors. I had not wanted to put any part of him in the lake, but my mother had insisted. It was what he wanted, she said, because he was the sort of man who believes that the dumb shape of work and water means something if you put 2 things together that understand effort. Watching the wet shape lean against the world, I understood that I had been wrong. The lake was not the place you bring a person to honor them. The lake was a place that ate names and took what you stacked and turned it into something else. It had rules, but the rules were not for me. Not really. They were for the lake. They were concessions, like the ones the old keepers had with their knees, with their wives, with their bad backs, and the moths in the oil. At 2337, the radio came on again and said my name in the voice of a man who had never met me. The horn did its best to drown it. Lightning reached for the tower like a polite handshake. I did not open. The shape on the catwalk turned its head by degrees like it was learning what necks are for, and then the light swung and it wasn't there. In the after-image my cells made, there was something small pressed against the glass on the outside, the neat kiss print of a child's mouth. When the lens swung past again, the kiss print was gone. The storm crested after midnight and laid down like a big animal, deciding to sleep. The horn could go back to automatic and then off, but I kept it on for the pleasure of something bigger than me shouting at the lake. I was not tired. I had sent my tiredness down to the engine room to hold a wrench. I cleaned the coffee cup. I composed what I would write in the log-in sentences that would look good to an inspector. Local conditions. Wind WSW 35G 45, vs 1/8 mile in fog and rain, lightning frequent, horn sounding, unusual noise, bell-like structure, time uncertain, unidentified contact on catwalk, did not grant admission, radio interference, maintenance. I did not write the kiss. I did not write the smell. I did write the part about counting at 0240 because I forgot myself and counted the landings as I went down to look at the battery banks and then up again. 15 to the workroom, 15 to the watchroom, 15 to the lantern. I wrote it down because I am a person who writes things down, and in the doing I violated the order under inventory, do not count. As soon as the word 15 hit the page, I knew I had fed something. It felt like pouring a jar of ball bearings on a plate, and I could not gather them up again quickly enough to pretend it had not happened. In the noise that came in on the next wind, the footsteps in the stair were not mine. They were heavier. They did not pause at the landings where a person checks the world with the eye of the body that has learned its own limits. They came like pressure, same pitch, all the way up. I set the flat of my palm against the green binder. I turned the pages with brutish care. Do not count. If you count, the lake will count you. The lake is better at counting. If you must count, count backward from 100 and stop at 0. If you keep going past 0, go to light and do not open the door. That last sentence was written in a different hand, the careful hand, broken by something like crying in the wrist. I went to the top of the stair, and I put my back against the door to the lantern, even though the thing on the steps was interior to the door, not exterior, and I counted backwards, 100, 99, 98. I am not superstitious. I am not. 97, 96, 95. The footsteps paused on the landing below the watchroom. 94, 93, 92. The barometer needle touched 29.50 and hung there like the hand of a man who has to pick which document to sign. 91, 90, 89. The generator gave a missing beat. I smelled lilac again, faint behind the diesel and drowned hot metal. 88, 87, 86. The footsteps resumed upward, and my mouth opened, and the noise that came out was not mine. 85, 84, 83. My lips made the numbers, while another voice came out of the room, my father's voice, my own voice, one I had not heard and did not want to hear, but had been carrying since the day I signed. 82, 81, 80. The footsteps stopped. 79, 78, 77. I felt a touch on the cuff of my jacket, like a woman at a bar asking if she could take the seat. It pulled once, gently, the tug of a rope, telling you it is sound. I stopped counting at 60, because that was as far as the mechanical trick of my mind had signed on to go. and I was angry at fireworks, at weather, at the laugh in readying SI when she said the binder would be kinder on West Wind. The footsteps on the stairs resumed downwards. I pressed my head against the steel, and the sweat on my forehead ran cool. If you break a rule, there is a way to unbreak it. Ask the rule for the opposite. I asked the stair. It did not answer. The lake did. The noise that came up was like a wave discovering a new face. The weather eased on the third day. The light kept turning. Small birds hit the glass and slid. I swept up to sparrows and a warbler from the watchroom floor where they had come to rest against the brass latch with rag-weary hearts, and I carried them down to the lower deck and let the wind take what was left. It felt like we were in truce. I cleaned until that itself felt like breaking a rule. I opened the green binder and found that someone had written on the inside back cover in pencil, very neat and not confident, H. Keeler, season 1978, left early. These are good rules. Do not be proud. The name was not one from the donor lists. On the fourth morning, a boat came. The sea state was 2, maybe 3, little shoulders on the black. It had a paint job like the tender and numbers on the cabin, and 2 men in blue jackets with life vests, and the posture of people who feel they are being watched by the rules. They hailed me with a big, cheerful gesture and announced their intention to lay alongside and pass a note in a bucket. The schedule on the chart table showed a resupply for Thursday. It was Wednesday. I went to the binder and put my hand on the tab for visits like a parishioner touching a saint's foot. If the tender comes on a Monday, do not lower the ladder. If the tender comes with a name you recognize that is not in the schedule, do not lower the ladder. If the tender comes in a sea state greater than 3, do not lower the ladder. If the tender comes after equinox with flags you don't recognize, call it in and go to inventory. It was after equinox. I did not recognize the flags. I did not lower the ladder. Radio you, one of the men called, making a telephone of his fist. I nodded, like a man who still had a radio to radio on. In their faces I saw patience and insistence, married to a kind of boredom like a coin. They waited a while in a rotation around the shoal, their wake slopping water up over the landing deck. Then they left. At 1300, the radio attempted to come to life without power again. It had the energy of a fish flipping. The horn was off now, and the world had a quiet that felt tender and false. I walked over to the rack and put my palm flat to the front panel, a posture I had already developed that looked like prayer and felt like checking if the devil had a fever. It was lukewarm from being near other warm things. The microphone, which I had left draped neck first over a bracket so I would have to actively reach to get it, was forward on the desk, as if someone had laid it there in a hurry. I did not think about how. I put it back. Stannard, the speaker said, and I jerked like a dog in a thunderstorm because it was my father's voice again. Easy, like before his stomach had turned mean. You got to let them aboard when they fly that flag. He described the flag perfectly. The names of the men. A little joke about reading. I went to the catwalk and looked east and saw nothing, and looked west and saw nothing, and looked down and saw the landing ladder with its rust left like a patina on religious bronze. One of the rungs had salt on it, a sprinkling like someone had turned their wrist carelessly over an egg. I had never salted the ladder. I had never salted anything outside dawn. I went in. I wrote in the log that I had observed unauthorized approach and denied boarding. I wrote that horn was tested and operative. I wrote that engine was inspected. I did not write that the radio knew my father's way of describing a woman he respected. Good with tools. I could have made a game of accusing myself of being spooked, of seeing faces on the catwalk licked out of fog of hearing, a voice in static that knew my name because I had told it unconsciously or not the night. I was young and wanted to be overheard by a big thing, but the rules did not seem to allow for that kind of ambivalence. The rules felt like something left in place so a person would have to pick. I picked. What broke the next piece of me was small. I was making dinner. The galley is a pocket you forgive because it has to be. The window had yellow paint in the corners and a chip in the lower right, like a star. I was eating noodles with jar sauce out of a stainless bowl on principle, and I went to the cabinet for a spoon, and the drawer where spoons live had a spoon in it that wasn't mine. The local orders had a bad joke scribbled about the whisper, asking for a spoon. This was a spoon. It was engraved with the name of a ship, the Benson Ford, and had the shape of a thing that had lived its life on a lakeboat until a woman who wanted decent coffee had taken it in her pocket in 1964. It had a bend in the handle, like it had been twisted in anger or for torque. I held it like a communion wafer. I put it back very gently and closed the drawer and ate with a fork. After dinner, I took the fork and the spoon down to the landing and threw them as far as I could. The spoon made a knot sound, all absorption. The fork hit the rung of the ladder on its way down and made a single bright note that the water took away with love. That night, the knock came 232 at 0013, which was after midnight, but before 0007, which was an arithmetic error on my part that the lake had no obligation to honor. I did not open, I did not sleep. At 0340, I wrote in the log that the wind had backed north and the pressure had risen. I did not write anything else. On the 6th day, the engine surged and died. It did this in a way that made nothing shocking about it. It simply quit like it had been asked nicely and seen the sense in declining. The battery bank took up the load without a hiccup, pouring its stored temper into the sets that duty demanded, and the horn stayed asleep and the light kept turning, and I felt the lake take a step closer. Power loss in daylight is a note in a log. Power loss at night is a knock. I went down with the tool roll. The smell of fuel was new, sharp, and the drip I had wiped on day 2 had gone to a damp patch that spread and glittered. I shut the day tank valve and wiped my hands, and my hands came up with black stripes, as if someone had put on tiger paint with a thumb. I replaced the fuel filter like a man in a training video. I bled the line. I said things like, "Okay, buddy," to an engine that could not hear or would not answer. The engine coughed politely and stopped. I had a second filter, and I put it in, and the O-ring would not seat. The O-ring looked like an O-ring. It felt like one. There was no reason on earth it should not behave except one. O-ring was like many other rings in the human project, good and round. And the other was not a circle at all, but an idea in the shape of a target. The green binder was on the workbench because I had brought it downstairs, like a child brings a blanket. I flipped to inventory with a black stripe on my thumb. Do not count. Do not count cans or light bulbs or rags. Do not mark tally. Do not count until you are done needing the number. The sense I took this is the way a person playing at piety reads anything, is that I should not count how many filters were left. There were 2. I took one, which was all, and did not look for the other. The O-ring seated. The engine came on in a shudder and held. I wiped the patch. The oil smell that followed was sweet as a funeral. Back on watch, I'd just started to forgive the engine when the light flickered. It did this once, twice, then corrected. The motor hummed, and the lens continued its faithful carpentry of dividing practice into light and not. The flicker had been not the motor, but the bulb, which had a scheduled replacement in 600 hours, and was dimmer than it had been on arrival, a thing I could not know but believed, because it gave me something to do. I went to the shelf for the spare, and found 2 baskets sitting side by side, one marked VRB2, 5 lamps, the other marked VRB2, 5 lamps, the left basket older, the right basket newer. And some part of Reading's to Casual tour rewound in my head and said, keep the spares in the wire basket on the right. The one on the left is for dead ones. I had not written this down, and it was not in the binder. I picked up the older basket because I have a disease that makes me have to touch the thing I shouldn't. Like it is a stove, and my hand wants proof. The bulbs in it were identical to the ones in the other basket until I looked at them from an angle and the world bent around them wrong. I put that one down and picked up a lamp from the right-hand basket and held it like a child, one palm under the body, one at the base, and breathed out and smiled, because a person is allowed to have a feeling when a small part of the world goes right. Swapping the lamp means the light is dark for a minute, too, if you're careful, and the orders were plain on the matter of letting the lantern be dark. Between sunset and 0007, it was 1540, with a blue beyond the glass a man could drink. I pulled the breaker. The motor spun down with a sound like a kind file on a file. The light went dark. I didn't look into the lens. I did not. My eyes were on my hands, and the stupid little screws, and the feel of things aligning. And in the glass around me, the lake made a dark that had depth, and then hands pressed from the outside. For a second, there were the ghostly prints of 4 fingers splayed, and a thumb learning how to hold on. They slid down, as if wet skin couldn't get a purchase. The pressure behind those hands was patient. The rules were plain. I heard the horn in my head from 2 nights ago, my own private foghorn. I heard my father's instruction at age 8, move the work in front of you into the future. Who cares about now? I put the lamp in. The new filament glowed like an argument you have with yourself, and I threw the breaker, and the lens lit, and the motor took up its duty. And the prints on the outside glass were not prints, now they were smear where suckers had been. At sunset, it began again, because the lake came for what you took from it, or offered to it. There seemed no other category. An oar boat far to the south called out its name properly, and some other boat closer in called mine wrong. The tender appeared on the horizon at 1840, and then hid behind a squall that came out of a clear sky, and I thought, there is an inspector who does not wear the right face. I thought, I will test it. The binder did not say, do not test. The men on the boat were the same men. They had their faces on, hands fine with rope. They went about their jobs in a way that telegraphed competence so hard it dyed the air. They had the flag I had been told about, and jackets with the patch I recognized, and one of them had a scar across his hair that told a good story about falling asleep on a hatch in 2002. They asked for the ladder. I pretended to struggle with the idea. Then I said into the makeshift speaking tube you form with both hands and a certain attitude, "What's my call sign?" "K4972, the scar said, ready like a reflex. "What's the word?" "Spruce," he said, and the way he said it was in the mouth of a man who had said spruce 3 times today and would say spruce 3 more before he got his dinner. My head had an ache up the back, like a knife inserted wrong. I kept to the script. What color is the light? He squinted, annoyed at testing. White, he said. Flashing white, 10 seconds. I said the stupid little thing my father would have said, which is a trap for both men and boats. You sure? Buddy, the scar said, and his voice took on a kindness that had murder in it. We can take you off tonight. Weather's not lovely, but it's going to come worse the next day, radar says. And you know how it gets up here. Pack a bag. Don't be a hero. I looked at the clock. I looked at the date. Even day. The binder said answer only to the call sign. If hailed by given name, do not answer. They had not used my name. They had done everything right, including the way the boat pitched its bow against the nap of the waves. There was one thing wrong. It was small. It was the way the spray came off their hullet fell wrong. The drops did not fly free and disperse. They arranged themselves into an arch that wanted to come back to the boat. So I gave in like a fool. I lowered the ladder. I made it halfway down before my body began to feel like it had been sprinkled with salt. Not hard, just a little. The men were smiling like men with a job well done, and the one with the scar reached up his hand for mine. What's the word? I said. Stupid. And he gave me spruce again, and I said, stupid, who wants to know? And he said, your father, with a small laugh, meant to end things and begin other things. I took my hand back, the salt feeling pressed at me. My wrist itched where it had been tugged that night at the door. I stood on the ladder. I thought of the light above me, not dark. I thought of the left-hand basket of spares. I thought of the inventor of the diaphone horn, whoever he was, and whether he had ever made weird provisions for when the horn did not speak, but hummed. The lake is better at counting. The lake is better at counting. I hoisted the ladder a foot like a butcher, undecided, and then I raised it by inches with the crank in a rhythm a fisherman might recognize on his last day. The men did not argue the ladder against me. They were patient. They were good with rope. They held station with a skill that was also a type of greed. When the ladder was up and locked like a jaw, I pictured their faces with teeth just slightly too wet. Sorry, I said. No relief on even days. This was not a rule in the book. It was the opposite of a rule in the book, and because of that, it did something. The world changed. The scar looked up at me with a face like a rubber mask of a man, and for a second you could see the seam on the line where it met the real monster's water. Then the boat bucked, and the men, who were now not men, took their boat and turned it like a mussel and left without a wave, stern down like a diving loon. I logged unauthorized approach. I did not log the feeling that the tender had been the weight of the tower's name. The 7th night I felt good, which is another trap. I swept and wiped brass and drank coffee that tasted clean and burned my tongue. The radio stayed dead. The horn stayed quiet, and the lake shopped for arguments it decided not to purchase. I went down to the engine room because the engine's friendliness had become a kind of niceness I didn't trust. The day tank was full. The line was dry. The belts were Boy Scout tight. I touched everything like a surgeon. On the way back up, I made the mistake of being calm enough to let the rhythm take me, and I counted. Not steps this time, landing's end. I counted 9, and at 9 I paused and said 9 in my head again, just to be sure. And the steps under my feet said 10 back to me with a little bounce, and the air got thin. Unbreaking, ask the rule for the opposite. If you count, count backwards. I did. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, Then I made myself pause and put my palm flat on the steel and ask it out loud, because that felt like half the magic. What is the opposite of counting? The lake answered right away with the sound of one wave, not two. And in that absence, the footsteps that wanted to be behind me did not form. I went to the watchroom and said thank you to the empty room, because it had been a long time since I had said thank you to something I couldn't see and meant it. It might have ended in truce. It did not. If a thing wants you, it wants you in the most efficient way. Rules are a way to slow that wanting down. Break a rule and the gap narrows. Follow it. I woke on the 8th night to a knock that was not a knock. It was the barometer hitting the peg. I could feel it from the bunk pressure dropping under the floorboards to see if I would notice. I picked up the green binder. It was heavy as a bucket. In the lantern, the light was white and the lake was black, and the air between was gray and close, like the inside of a bakery oven before dawn. Lightning started as a taste in my teeth, then took the tower with the care of a surgeon. The horn wanted continuously, and I set it to continuous. The tender was out there because the tender was always out there now when it was worst. A little truth riding a big lie. The radio came on and went off like a heartbeat, and on it my voice recited the last log entry. Wind in NE 40G 55, VS 1/16, barometer 29.16, and falling, horn continuous, light steady. It used my pauses and my handwriting. It asked me for spruce. I went to the lens with the stupid bravery of a man who likes procedure more than he likes his own heart. The lens was a tall bell of glass you could sit inside when you were a boy and pretend to be the heart of a lion. I had not yet looked directly into it with it running. Do not look into the lens while the motor is running. Do not look into the lens when the motor is off. I did not. I stood to its side, and I saw my own reflection run up its height and be cut into slices by the cut of the glass. In those slices, my father was in his boots, and my mother in her coat, and I was a shape that did not show the face. The light did its work. If I saw anything else, I do not have words, and the temptation is to make a poetry of it, which I won't. The knock came to the steel door, 232. I did not open. The knock came 3 even. I did not open. The horn was a continuous wall. The lightning made day. The engine fell off and came back, and fell off and came back, until it made a sound like a man with a chest wound. The kiss print came back in the lightning and stayed. It was a wide mouth, not a child's, and there were little fangs nested like fish teeth among the shape of human teeth. The smell of lilac rolled along the ceiling, thickening into a syrup that ran down the walls. I salted the stair. You salt when you are baptized, and you salt when you bury. The lake already knew that, but the smell rose harder, closer, and then the lilac was in my mouth, like a bloom had been put there. I swallowed salt until I gagged. You put a system under pressure, and you see what it does. The rules were a system. Put enough force behind any system, and it reveals its logic. The green binder told me, if you must harm the station to avoid opening the door, do small harm first. There are larger harms. It is better to be fined than eaten. The small harm is the foghorn. The larger harm is the light. The largest is the door. I went to the fog signal control and set it to odd rhythms. Science be damned. The horn hiccuped and broke its straight line, long, short, long, and in that break, something outside shifted its feet with a sound like suction cups, leaving glass. You take from anything in the right rhythm, and it will give you a piece of itself. I needed the opposite of light. The binder had said, "Don't ask." I asked anyway, because I had broken things, and men who break things learn to ask even when told not to. "What is the opposite of light?" I said out loud, to my shame, and the tower shook with lightning. "The lake, which is large, which is not clever, which has a will, the way weather has will, offered me this. The light goes off. Put out the light. Between sunset and 0007. Do not." It was after 0007. The most obvious trap in the world lay in that space, and I put my foot in it. I pulled the breaker. The motor spun down. The lens lost its heart. The watchroom grew cavernous. I had meant to count to 100 backward and throw the breaker again before anything could learn a new rule. I had meant to hurry. I did not have time to do either. The press of hands on the glass turned into the weight of a body on the catwalk. Then two, then more. They did not knock. They had no need. The dark finds dark. I broke the breaker. Back closed. The motor coughed. The light came on. In the glass, pressed against the curve, there was a face like mine with the hair wrong and the eyes to set to the side, like a pike's. It smiled in a way that said it had learned something about my mouth. Its tongue left a smear. The smear stayed brightly, brilliantly white, like someone had cleaned a small window in a dirty pane. The light made that window into a hole. If I had put my hand where that smear was, the shape of my hand would have disappeared into something that the lake offered out of courtesy. I did not put my hand there. I put the green binder against it like a shield, and in the second of contact, the binder grew heavy, and a smell like ink burning filled the watchroom, and when I took it away, the cover was printed with a single word in the hand of H. Keeler, or whoever, had taught H. Keeler to write. Stay. The horn died. The engine died. The light ran on inertia for a turn, 2, 3. The tower took lightning in the heart. For a second there was no sound. Then the sound came like a sheet, and it had new names in it, and one of them was mine. The radio spoke without juice and said, K4972. On a loop, the way a man says his wife's name in a waiting room to keep from crying, and then it said spruce, like a thing that had learned 2 words in a foreign language and was using them for yes and no. I did the opposite of what felt noble. I went downward. If you cannot count, hold the rail and wait to feel the pull on your sleeve. You will feel it only once. Do not turn. I held the rail. I did not count. I waited for the pull. It came at the landing where the little chalk marks had been, a gentle tug in the direction of the engine room. The engine room had a secondary breaker panel and a manual throw for the horn that could make noise without the mother panel. And it had a crowbar I had not logged because I had not wanted to make a live inventory of iron in a place where iron rung like a bell every heartbeat. The lilac smell thickened the lower I went, and then changed. The way smells change when you move past them to their source. It turned into something like wet clothes in a bag. The floor was slick. The lake had gotten into the ballast in a way that felt illicit. The breaker panel had tripped its whole heart out. The horn manual throw did nothing because the horn didn't want to be involved anymore. Down past small harm to larger harm. The secondary battery bank had a switch like a guillotine. It starts a fire if you want it to. I did not want it to. I pulled it anyway and breathed shallow, the way the rule told me to when thunder was continuous, because the air down there was a powder waiting for one idiot to light a match. The engine understood. It did not come to when I begged it. It came to when I put my hand on it in the posture of apology. It came to like a big thing that had been offended and came back because of a rule. If a man returns your tool, you return his warmth. The horn did not return. The light above me did the job alone. White on, white off. 10 seconds a law. I went back up. The rail had handprints that were not mine, because a wet creature had climbed the interior, which the binder had not said in so many words, because the binder was not a friend. It was a set of instructions, written by a woman to herself, to keep herself from doing the thing that felt good. I did not feel heroic. I felt like a clerk who had been asked to draw a sword and had drawn a pencil. On the top 3 steps, I heard the other steps behind me again, the heavier ones that had stopped when I had counted backwards before. They were patient. They were done testing. They wanted to come into the lantern, where the rule was not to look, and also not to keep the light off. I could make a lot of noise with my mouth, and it would be either a prayer or a conversation. The radio had taught me how to tell those apart. I put my hand on the doorknob to the lantern, and as I did, the pull came on my sleeve again. Once, opposite the door, I stopped. It felt like being told the way by a person who didn't speak your language, but knew your city. There was one other place in the tower you could go that was not up and not down. I went sideways. There's a little closet off the watchroom that used to be a speaking tube down to the boat landing. The tube is gone. There's a pipe through the wall that comes out under the catwalk and points at the lake like a gun with nobody to shoot it. It's where the spare Wicktons used to live when the light ate oil. Now, it had a pile of canvas behind it and a brass mouthpiece like a trumpet that someone had polished with their shirt. The binder had a line in water. You may hear it moving at night. Do not mop steps in the dark. Do not fix leaks after midnight. Use the speaking tube only when you need to talk to the lake. Do not ask questions. I had laughed at this when I read it. I did not laugh now. I put the trumpet mouthpiece to my lips and breathed out. The sound through the pipe was the sound of a man who has come to the edge of a quarry and made a noise, and the quarry has made a noise back. There was almost a sense in it. The wind moved through it like a lung. The lake, alerted to language, came closer like a dog to a hand. I did not ask a question. That was the rule. I said a thing that was not a question and did not feel like a prayer, but I told the lake what I had learned from the rules and what I would do if it would let me. And the thing I said was this: I will leave your door shut. I will keep your light on. Do not ask me to count. The knock at the lantern door subsided. The other steps on the stair receded by one landing. The smell of lilac crawled away like a guilty thing under a porch. Above me, the light performed its civic duty for men who would never know it had been in doubt. The horn stayed dead because it had decided itself irrelevant. The radio took my last log entry and said it again in my voice, and then tried on the voice of H. Keeler, which I had never heard, and then it went to static. If you want a neat ending, you will not get it here. The storm rolled off east and found other towers. The tender came 2 days later on the schedule, with readying a board and a box of donuts so hard they had to be warmed on the radiator before you dared teeth. She climbed up with a look I could not read until I decided that reading was wrong. It was not a look created for my benefit. It belonged to the space inside her where she kept her own rules. She did not ask me what had happened. I did not tell her. I signed for diesel and filters and rags and a replacement lamp, all with the careful hand of a man who wants to be paid for his hour. I used the name of the inspector on the manifest, and the inspector signed with a flourish I did not like. Before the tender left, Reading put a new page in the binder. She had it between 2 sheets of blank paper like a surgeon hitting a sterile field, and slipped it into local orders under emergency. She did not read it out loud. After they shoved off, I opened the binder and read it. It was in her ugly printing, and it said, "If you must speak through the tube, say only a promise. Do not ask for anything. Do not talk about numbers. If they offer you relief on the wrong day, do not trade days. Days are theirs." The last line was in a different hand. H. Keeler, S. Careful one. The inspector who wears the wrong face will ask to see the tally. There is only one tally. Do not let him see it. There was an arrow at that line, and a note, under paint, "Service landing, starboard brace." I took a scraper, and went down, and went to the brace on the starboard side, and under 3 coats of gray, I found a set of little notches I had erased, and above them, in the wet, someone had cut one more, a single notch, and next to it, the words, "This one came back. When I sleep now, it is in pieces. I wake for the hourly log, and smear myself into the seat like a sticker, and write wind, and viz, and pressure, and flip to storm, if the needle tells me, and flip to light. If the steps on the stair tell me, and flip to visits, when a boat comes with men whose faces pinch when they say spruce. I have learned to watch the spray when a boat turns. Real water flies apart. Their water tries to return. I have learned to salt the steps in a line that is not a line, and wait for the smell to not be a smell. I have learned that you can unbreak some rules, and some you can only lay next to and count the breaths until morning. I have learned that if you hold the rail and wait, something that is not a person and does not love you will pull your sleeve one time in the direction of a thing that will not kill you today. On odd nights, I do not answer the radio. On even nights, I answer to K4972 and ask for spruce, and ask only that if a voice that is not mine or my father's says my name with the pleasure of a coin, that the lake be given a different mouth to taste. If a man downbound for the Sioux blows 3 longs in the fog, I answer him once, and it is sweet, the old music. If the bell rings, I do not move. If the light shows white, I hold it in my heart and call it good. You want an ending you can take home and put in a jar with a label. Here is what I have. The lake is a rule you can follow or break, but you cannot change. The rules in the green binder are negotiations written down by people who did not think of themselves as negotiators. H. Keeler left early, which in our line is a way of saying she left alive. Somewhere in the stack of rags in the workroom is a spoon that will cut your lip if you eat carelessly, and if you take it to the landing and throw it, it will make no sound, and that is a fact. The inspector with the wrong face will come until I die, or they retire this station, and drop a GPS light on a buoy that cannot have a catwalk. He will ask for numbers, and I will not have any, and he will go away, because some rules even they respect. At night, when the light hits the glass and shows me the world in slices, I sometimes see something pressing its mouth to the outside, and sometimes the print it leaves is small, like a child's, and sometimes it is wide, like a fish, and sometimes there is no print at all, and that is when I find it hardest not to open the door. If you come here after me, find the green binder and sign for it with the hand that you really use, and put your name in it where the hand that taught you wrote on worksheet paper that first day. Salt lives under the sink. The right basket holds good lamps. The left holds dead ones, or something that wants to be in the right basket. Do not count. Do not count the steps on the stair, or the cans in the pantry, or the days that remain. and do not mark tally on the steel. If you count, the lake will count you, and it is better at counting. If the radio offers you spruce, give it spruce, and if it offers you your father, give it silence. When you smell lilac, wait. When you hear a bell, wait. When you hear the second set of steps, and the pull comes on your sleeve, don't be proud. Go the way it tells you. There is one tally under paint that will have one more notch if you learn, as I did, to do small harm first, then larger. Do not open to tooth ride. Do not look into the lens. Do not look too long at the lake, either. You will think you see shapes in the spray. You will think they have faces. If you write them down on the chart, it will take you with your pen. I am writing this at 0318 on a night without weather to speak of. Wind east, 5 knots. Visibility, 10 miles under a moon the size of a dime held at arm's length. Pressure, 30.06 and steady. In the watchroom, the light uses me as a counterweight. The horn is off. The engine hums as if it is teaching itself a song. The radio makes small noises like a fish in a bucket and leaves it at that. I would like to tell you that I am not afraid anymore. That would be a better story. The truth is, I am afraid in a way that isn't about my safety. I am afraid of making a rule that shouldn't exist, of adding to the orders with something that has my pride on it, and not the lake's necessity. H. Keeler wrote, "Do not be proud." People put that shape on their walls, like kindness or courage. Here it is not a wall word, it is a wrench word. I will check the lantern again now, as if it needs it. I will not open to any knock. If voices come, I will not answer after 2,300 on odd days, and will answer only to the name the government has given me on even ones, because the lake respects a certain kind of paperwork. I will not count. I will keep the light white. I will leave small offerings of salt where salt is best understood. I will hold my sleeve up when there is a tug, and go the way the tower tells me. And when I leave, if I leave, I will tell the man who replaces me to sign for the binder and to read local orders, as if he were reading something that had already decided about him and was willing to renegotiate if he learned to shut the right doors. Stannard Rock does not care what we call it. It has one long name that the lake says when the horn is off, and the birds are gone, and the oil smell moves from sweet to a brown note. Some nights I think the name is mine, and then I remember the rule, and I do not say it out loud, and I do not write it here. I hear the steps begin on the stair. The clock says 0320. I am holding the rail. I am not counting. I am waiting for the pull on my sleeve. I will feel it only once. I will go that way. I will keep the light on.